Hi everyone, I am Nived. So in this video, I am giving a basic introduction to Robotic Enterprise Framework. So in the next few videos, I am going to do some tutorials related to Robotic Enterprise Framework so that we can know a great knowledge on Robotic Enterprise Framework. So at first, we have to know what is Robotic Enterprise Framework. A robotic enterprise framework is a template that is developed in Uipath using state machine layout. So, robotic enterprise framework is mostly based on transactional processing. So, before that, we have to learn what is a state machine layout. So, this is a basic overview of the state machine layout that actually I have represented using flowchart, and it is in the Uipath. There are sequences, workflow, layout, etc. But another type is called state machine. Mostly we hadn't frequently use it, but the state machine is actually entirely built upon this. The robotic enterprise framework is entirely built upon the state machine. So you can see here there are two states. Mostly this is an overview of the state machine so that you can have a better understanding of the RE framework when looking into it. So these are the two states. You can say this is state 1 and this is state 2. So to go from state 1 to state 2, there exists a condition. Means if this condition is only satisfied, the state 1 is triggered, state 2 is triggered. Okay. So it is actually a interchanging between the state. Okay. So if you want to know more about it, you can refer like UiPath Academy videos. They have given some examples related to state machine layout, etc. So you can refer them. But for RI framework, you just need to understand the concept. That is, whenever when the condition is satisfied, only you can go to another stage. Okay. So this is about basic overview of the state machine. Now let's move to the robotic enterprise framework. So for that, so this is actually the robotic enterprise framework, and you can see it is completely built using state machine. And here I told you the state machine actually works on different states. So these are different state. You can see the initialization is a state, get transaction data is a state, process transaction is a state, end process is also a state. And to move from one state to another, there exist a particular conditions. Okay. So let's move through all these one by one, through all these states one by one. Okay. So first is initialization state. Initialization state means we are initializing. Mostly the description is already written here because you can see here read configuration file and initialize the application used in the process. So mostly initialization state means, for example, you are actually mm, writing, or sorry, you are working on an application. So for working in the application, first you have to open the application. So opening the application, you can mostly it is completely done in the initialization stage, or you want to open a browser by providing login details. All these stages are actually done in the initialization stage itself. And there is another term called read configuration file. Mostly there is a important file that is used. It is an Excel file, and through this Excel file we can input the required data and we can obtain in the form of dictionary file that I will tell you later. So first you have to understand what is initialization state. Initialization state mostly helps to initialize all our applications. You can see here initialization state, and you can see this is the initialization workflow. You can open from here, and here you can initialize the application. For example, this is a UI demo application. Actually, this UI demo application is provided by UiPath for doing their automation works, sample automation works. So to open this application, we require username and password. So we can able to. So this is the first stage of doing a automation, because for that we require the username and password. All this process done in the initialization stage. Okay. So this is for demonstration only. And next stage you can say is get transaction data stage. I told you that the robotic enterprise framework works on transaction processing, etc. So before transaction processing, I need to explain about the conditions. You can see that I told you that to go from one state to another, there exists a condition. So you can see that there are two conditions. If occurs a system exception, it goes to end process. If it is successful, it goes to get transaction data. So what does it mean? It means that, for example, if your application opens but it cannot able to process, for example, or if your application process correctly, then it is a successful. But for example, if your application does not open due to some system errors, etc., it is considered as a system exception, and as a result it will end the complete process. That is, end process is a state where complete process being end by closing the applications, etc. And so you can just check here, if just clicking on this and just click on this property panel, you can see the condition system exception is nothing. There is no system exception, it is a successful state. So if initialization is successful, it can go to get transaction. If you consider this condition, you can see system exception is not nothing, means there is a system exception, so it will end the process completely. Okay. And so next state is get transaction data stage. So get transaction data state, I told you that the get transaction the robotic enterprise framework works on transactional processing. Means first you have to identify what is actually a transaction. A transaction is defined as a bit of information which is to be processed. Okay. For example, I considered a data. You just wait, I show you a excel file. Excel file, for easy understanding I am showing excel file. uh, Actually this data, yeah, it's opening. Yeah, this is a data, you can say this is an excel data, and this data is mostly used in UI demo that I showed you an app earlier. Now there we are using this, okay, for usage we are using this data. So you can see that it is an excel data. So I told you that a transaction is a bit of information that is used for processing. So here in that, how a robotic enterprise framework work is, it actually at first time it will take the first row and it will take the values of the first one in a data row format. Mostly transaction items may be, you can say, it may be in a raw format or it may be in a string format, etc. It depends upon the application. So it will take this data first time, it will process the data. Okay. So next time it again come to get transaction state and again process second data, and third time it again process this data, fourth time again process this data. So this is actually happening there in robotic enterprise framework. You just consider like a for loop. First condition it will process, second it will process, third it will process. Similarly in state it will take one data at a particular time and it will process the data. Second time it takes the second data, at the second time it will process the data. So this is actually how your robotic enterprise framework works, and you will get more clear when you are doing some tutorials on it. Okay. Actually it may be very difficult for first time to understand. Before if you're getting an example for it, you will clearly understood this. So in the get transaction state, whatever you are doing here is you are taking the data. Means if for example this is a transaction data or transaction data. So this transaction data is being taken. For example, one transaction data is being assigned. Okay. So okay, so it is actually happening in this get transaction data. And just you can look more into workflow. And I first thing I have to tell you is that the robotic enterprise framework is defaultly based on queue item. So queue item, you know, I think it is mostly working on queue item defaultly, but you can change it for working in a data table mode, etc. but in the next tutorial on RPA challenge I will do it on the first on the data table, and in another video I will do it on the queue, so that you can understand how to use them both case. So you just open this workflow. This is a get transaction data workflow. Here I told you that it is defaultly based on queue. So you can see it uses get transaction item, because in queue we are storing a collection of data, and each collection of data is known as a transaction. That is why it is actually retrieving each collection of data. The Okay, so that is why we are using get transaction item. And if we are here we if we in this section, if we get the transaction item, we can assign different values. It is actually optional, it is not required actually. It is actually optional. If you require, we can do it. Okay, so you can see in the Robotic Enterprise Framework, every exception are easily handled. You can see it is completely built upon try and catch. So, and it also catches all the type of exception, like business exception, system exception, etc. It can easily handle. That is one of the advantage of using the Robotic Enterprise Framework. Okay, so so after taking a particular data, because in get transaction data we are getting the transaction. So this is the transaction which is to be processed, that is coming in the next state, which is called as process transaction. Okay, so we have got the data, and now since we have got the data, now we have to look for the condition. I told you that this is a state, so to move to process transaction state there should be a particular condition should be assigned now. So we can see there are two conditions. First is transaction item is not nothing. Here I told you that the each transaction is stored is called as transaction item. Okay, if we got a transaction item and it has certain, it is not nothing means it has some value, then it will go to process transaction state, where this transaction item is being processed. Otherwise, if there is no data, it indicates that it actually marks the end of the process, because for example, your transaction data row here, in this case you are transacting first data, you are transacting, then you go to second, then you go to third, at last mostly it is big data I think. At last you can see there are 51 data. After 51, after 51 if you go after 51, um, after 51 we are going for 52th transaction. We see that 52 transaction is null, so it indicates that there is no data. So since there is no data, it indicates that process is completely end, so it will go to end the process and all applications are closed. Okay, now so since we have got a transaction data here now, so now we can go to process transaction. So in process transaction we are processing that transaction data we got. Okay, here actually we are actually doing the application, like what process we require. Okay, what we process we require, like what I tell you, for example, you want this transaction data. For example, you take this transaction data that I have told you earlier. Okay, and now this data has to be inputted in another application. You consider this UI demo application. Just I open it. Yeah, you open this application. Now your main agenda of automation is, it is actually a sample banking related application for practice developed by Uipath. I will do a tutorial separately on this, okay, later. So for understanding I'm doing now. So what your agenda is, you got a transaction data. Okay, for example, you got this transaction data. Now your main aim is, you want to transfer this data, and you want to type this data and store in another means you have this transaction data. So you want your automation work to to type all this data here. For example, cash, you want to type here 9 11.07 911. Second, on US check you want to type, let's say, 231. On not on US check you want to type 10. Then you have to click accept. So this is your automation work has to be done on every data. So that is actually taking place in the process transaction. Means this transferring this, in this case of UI demo, means transferring that transaction item to be typed on the UI demo application. It takes place here. That is what we mean by process transaction. Process transaction is the active part, because where we want to do some work. Mostly, and before doing that, I have to tell you that this transaction is not only the Excel data that I have shown you. For example, it may come in many forms. For example, it may come in data row form that we have discussed, or it may come in string form, that I will tell you later. Like for example, um, yeah, like okay, so that I will tell you later, because so for example, you have the desktop. um, okay, just consider or another. I think you should consider better data. Otherwise it may confuse you. Mm, okay, for example, you just consider these files here. So each file you can consider as a transaction data. Sometimes you consider these are certain invoices. I forgot some data are there with me. Uh, Identity management. Okay, yeah, you have some files here. Okay, so each file you can consider as a transaction or transaction item. Each file you can consider transaction item. And for example, if you open this file, yeah, sometimes each file you can consider as a transaction item, and you can take necessary values from it. And these values you can you can use to type in some other applications, like for your automation purpose, etc. So that I want to tell you that you don't be mistaken with that. Transaction item can be only applied to Excel. It can be applied to the file system also. Okay, so that you have to keep in mind. But we will come with more tutorials so that you can understand where and which type of transaction data or transaction item we can assign and so on, so that you can understand more, because through examples you can understand more rather than telling you much of this theory. So in process transaction, most of our automation work is done. That already you have understood, I think. And the mostly the transaction may be either success, or maybe due to system exception, or due to business exception. You have to understand these two exceptions. System exception come like sometimes errors in system may happen. For example, I told you, if the application is not properly loading, that is considered as a system exception. Business exception means if the data is null. For example, if there is some data error, etc., it may be considered as a business exception. And you can just look here, process flow. Process, this is actually where we are like doing our process. Then processing our transaction is done here. We have to create a workflow here. Okay, I think you have understood about process transaction. Now we can go to the conditions, because we know that we have so whatever we have do is we have initialized the application, then we have got the transaction data, then we have processed the transaction data. But next step is we have to go to the get transaction data again. We can get the next transaction date item or transaction. Okay, so in this case, if I explain in this way, you first go take this data, you process it, means you type into that UI demo application. But in next stage you have to use this data and you have to type into the UI demo application. this has to be repeated for all the data. That is what actually it is happening here. So we process the data. Now we have three conditions. First condition, you can consider success. Just look here. The success conditioning, system exception is nothing and business exception is nothing. It indicates that there is no system exception and business exception is there. So that what is it will go to the get transaction data state again to take the next transaction data that I have told you. But if there is a business exception related with like some data, like there is some missing data, etc. Business exception can occur. If there is business exception, it will go to the get transaction data and then it will take the next value, because sometimes the other value this sometimes some values may be missing. So it may be business exception, but it will go again to the get transaction data and then take next transaction item. Okay. And if it is a system exception, maybe a system error, what it will do, it will again go to the initialization state and then process again, but it will start from the transaction. For example, transaction third, there may be occurring a system exception. It will start from the transaction third itself, and there is a retry number should be added. Means for initializing the system, means whenever a system exception occurs, initialization has to be done. For occurring the initialization, we have to set the maximum retry number. There is a variable here that we will discuss. Okay, but I can show you here in the variable section itself. You can see, yeah, mac retry number is considered 0 here. You can put it equal to 2 or 1, greater than 0 if you are using data table. If you are using queue, don't need to put it, because already in the queue it is being we are setting the, okay, so there is no need to do that. Okay. So I think you have understood a basic overview of RE framework. I think even you have some doubts in that, we will clear when we are doing our some tutorials. You may be very clear with that. And in my tutorials I will do with excels, maybe doing with files also, so that you keep you understand where you can apply the RE framework. Okay. So next is uh, so next, after all the process we have learned all the three states, next is end process. End process is a process where like closing all the application, means after the process being end we have to close the required application. It is okay, so that is actually has been done in end process, that you have to understand. Now now you can see how the data flows or data variable flows in the RE framework. Means already there are variables defined here. Just click here. Again, transaction item, system exception, business exception, transaction field 1, transaction field 2, transaction ID, transaction data. How the variables actually flow between. For that, actually in initialization, I think, yeah, initialization you can see in config is the argument that is defined in the init all application workflow, and the config is the, like, it is a dictionary, and this dictionary value, it is actually you can see that, just open this argument. You can see this in config argument. So this in config argument, where does it is getting the value? It is actually getting the value from the config dictionary. Okay, so to understand the config dictionary, let's move on to the config file that I have told you earlier. Yeah, this is the config file, and it has the greatest advantage of using this config file is that for example, actually config file converts this config file is being converted to dictionary there, and here you can see there is settings sheet, constant sheet, and asset sheet. And in setting sheet you can see that you can put all the values. For example, you want to put the website name, so what you can do, you just put the website, like say website, and you put the website, for example www dot Uipath, sorry, Uipath dot academy, just for example. Okay, so what is happening here is that this config file is converted to a dictionary format with name as the key and value as the value of the dictionary. Okay, so that is what is happening there. And for example, here you are putting the orchestrator q name, and it is actually a name of the dictionary, it is actually a key of the dictionary. Value will be this, means for example I have created a q name, for example abc. But let's say just type abc. Okay, so value is obtained, means for example, and this config file is converted to a config dictionary. So to access the value of this q name, so what you do, you just type config bracket, you just use this orchestrator q name, and you can get the retrieve the value. So what is the advantage of this? You can just look the in the section, in the get transaction you can see this more. In get transaction, uh, yeah, in get transaction you can see that in config means I told you that now, yeah, in config, because what we are doing here is that, yeah, we can see that config is a dictionary, and the config dictionary values are transferred to in config dictionary in the get transaction workflow. That is what we are doing here. Okay, so the in config dictionary contain all the values of the config dictionary. It is transferred from the through the invoke workflow option. If you didn't have much knowledge on the argument section, etc., please refer the videos on Uipath, so that you can have a better understanding about it. Okay, so you can see here in config it is actually dictionary, then orchestrator q name, that you can see here, yeah, orchestrator q name. Since we told you that this dictionary is in such a way, you can see dictionary format here, it is in the format of string and object, means the key will be a string, value will be an object. So since value is an object, we want to convert to string, we are using dot to string option. Okay, so advantage you can say, for example, you by mistaken you put a value abc, but you know that it was bcd, it was bcd. So advantage here is that if you want to change the queue name, you can just change the queue name here itself, not to go and change in this section, because here the value is changed but the key value is not, means the key is not in changing but the value is changed. That value change we have already set up in the excel file. So that is advantage of using the config file. Okay, so this is the setting section, and you will understand when it work. I will show you in the debug mode actually how it is being converted from a config file to a config dictionary, so you can have a better understanding of it. And here you are putting the name and the description, it is an optional. For example, orchestra q name, it is actually say that it's an orchestra q name, and it will be matched with the q name defined on the orchestrator. It is just for a understanding what is actually using, because for example if another user is using your workflow, he should have an understanding what is this and what is this and so on. That's why you are using it. For constants, these are some things. And here you can see important thing here to represent is maximum retry number. The maximum retry number should be 0. Is already described working with orchestrator q. If it is greater than 0, it should, I told you now, if there is a system exception, it will again go back and do this again. So that is what is has to be specified here, maximum retry number. Okay, so for queues you can set it as 0 itself, because in queue already there is a setting there for retrying option. But when you are working with data table, uh, you can set it greater than 2, mostly greater than 0, that is 2, etc. Okay, so don't say. So now I think you have a basic understanding about it. Now we can move how the data is being transferred, as I told you, so that many will not have much confusion while using the variables itself. We can see that the transaction number means, for example, we are processing first transaction. If you take the Excel file, where is the Excel file here? Yeah, I think it will go much bit back. I think I have, or you can consider any, yeah, and just consider this as the, yeah, this as the transaction data here, or transaction data for my RI framework. So here, uh, transaction number implies, you can see this is the first transaction. Okay, so transaction number is can consider 1 or 0, it depends upon you. This is the second transaction, third transaction. So which transaction is being processed, that is represented by transaction number. For example, if transaction number is first value means, defaultly the transaction number is here. Yeah, transaction number is always 1. It means that, for example, if transaction number is 1, it means this transaction. If transaction number is 2, it means this transaction. If transaction number is 3, this represents this. So it represents the transaction, how much transaction actually had occurred. If transaction number is 10, it indicates that 10th transaction is being done. Okay, so how the so we have understood what is transaction number. So in config means, here you can see in direction in means the value from the transaction number is transferred to the in transaction number, that is in the, that is in this workflow. Okay, at the same time, here in, it means that config dictionary is transferred into the in config argument that is present in this init, in this get transaction data workflow. And since we know that we are through this process we are obtaining the transaction item, this transaction item has to be obtained from this workflow. For that we are using an outside out argument, which is transaction item, out transaction item. Defaultly it is a queue, but you can change into data row if you require, and this is transferred into the outside variable, that is transaction item. And also these are actually optional field. I think similarly it is being arranged, other things are also being arranged now. So your output value is what, transaction item. Okay, this is transferred here. Now this data we have to transfer into a process transaction. So process transaction, you go here, and in process transaction or process state, you can see that this data, that is the data from we have obtained from the get transaction, is transferred into this in transaction argument that is present in this process workflow. Okay, similarly the config dictionary is also transferred. Okay, so you just open it, you can see argument here, two arguments already. This receives the data from the outside because it is an in argument, so it should receive data from outside. Okay, so this is actually how a variable transfer takes place between it. And now I think you have a basic understanding related to it. If you have any doubts, or I think we have covered, okay, I think we have covered everything. uh, let me see if anything needs to be covered. Let's say, yeah, I think end process is the last thing. I just nothing, I just, you can see you want to close the application. For example, you want to close this application, so the closing of this application takes place in this end process state. Okay, so that is what is happening to, so this is about just an overview about the RE framework. If you have any doubts, you just comment in the comment box. I can reach out to that. So thank you.